Hola, what's the weather like where you are today? Sunny, rainy, cloudy? Comment below.
It didn't start with a fight, no yelling, no slamming doors, no teenage melodrama, or threats to never come back. That kind of thing would have made it too easy for them to pin it on me, to twist it later into some story about how I was, just too emotional or always dramatic. No, the day I disappeared, I did it the only way I knew how, quietly, completely, and without leaving anyone anything to argue about. I left behind no mess, no tears, not even a note, just an empty room, a full tuition scholarship acceptance letter, and the echo of someone they never thought would actually leave. I still remember the way the air smelled that morning. It was early summer, that sticky kind of heat that makes your shirt cling to your back the second you step outside. I was 20, but I felt about 50. My bones ached from stress, from years of bending myself into the version of me they preferred. The good girl, the dependable one, the problem solver, you know the type. I was the one who cleaned up my brother's messes, who smiled through Thanksgiving dinners where no one asked about my classes, who worked 2 jobs to pay for community college because it's better to stay close to home and help out. That's what my parents always said, help out, be supportive, be grateful you're not in trouble like your brother, be patient with him. He needs us more. But let me rewind just a little, just enough for you to understand why that day mattered so much, why it burned into my memory like a scar that never fades. A week before I left, I had gotten the acceptance letter in the mail, full ride to a state university 3 states away. Not just tuition, but housing, books, even a small stipend for expenses. It was everything I had worked for in silence while my parents were too busy bailing my brother out of another DUI, or sitting in school offices explaining why he just needed more time. I brought the letter to the dinner table like some kid showing off a crayon drawing, hoping, stupidly I guess, that someone would light up, ask me what I needed, tell me they were proud. Instead, my mom barely looked up from her plate, and my dad said something I'd repeat in my head for years. That's nice, but college is kind of a waste these days, isn't it? And your brother needs our support more right now. I didn't argue. I didn't scream or cry. I just nodded and said, okay. I folded the letter back into the envelope like it wasn't the golden ticket it actually was, cleared the table, and washed the dishes while my brother sat in the living room playing video games and yelling at his girlfriend over speakerphone. That was the moment something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not with a bang, but with a quiet, final shift. I realized no one was coming to hand me a future. I'd have to take it. So I waited. I finished the semester. I worked my shifts. I packed slowly, a little every night, textbooks, clothes, the one photo of my grandmother that meant something to me. I didn't tell anyone. I didn't ask for help. I didn't say goodbye. On the morning I left, I took one last look at the house, at the cracked driveway where I'd scraped my knees learning to ride a bike, at the curtains my mom had never changed since the 90s. And then I got in my car, my beat-up sedan with a bad starter and no AC, and drove. There's a strange kind of freedom in not being wanted. You don't have to feel guilty for leaving. There's no obligation to come back. I didn't cry on the drive. I didn't wonder if they missed me. I didn't even look at my phone. I had already told the university I'd be there early for orientation. I had signed the paperwork. I had lined up an on-campus job. I had done what they said I couldn't or shouldn't do, and I did it alone. For the first few weeks, it felt like I was holding my breath underwater. Every time my phone buzzed, I thought it might be my mom, or maybe my dad, maybe even my brother, but the calls never came. Not even a, "Where are you?" They didn't notice, or worse, they noticed and chose not to care. And you know what? That hurt more. It hurt more than I ever let myself admit. Because even when you walk away, even when you know they never truly saw you, there's still this stupid little voice in your head whispering, maybe they'll come looking. They never did. And that silence, it became a fuel I didn't expect. I stopped waiting for their validation. I stopped trying to explain. I took every class like it was a fight, every exam like a battle, every professor like a test I had to pass, not just academically, but emotionally. I told myself I would become so good, so undeniably successful, that even the people who ignored me would have to turn their heads when I walked by. People think revenge is loud, that it's dramatic, but the best kind, the kind that really cuts deep, it's quiet, it's patient, it's a slow build, a long silence, a curtain that stays closed until just the right moment. I didn't slam the door when I left that house. That's too loud, too temporary. I just closed it behind me, soft, deliberate, and waited 4 long years for the knock that never came. It's strange how a sentence can sit inside your chest for years, like a shard of glass you can't quite dislodge, even though it doesn't bleed every day. It just waits, quietly, under the surface, until something touches it the wrong way, and suddenly you're gasping again, right back in the moment it first pierced you. That's exactly what happened the night they told me, so plainly, that my future was less important because my brother needed them more, as if love and support were limited rations, and mine had already been spent by the accident of not screwing up often enough to warrant attention. The conversation wasn't even dramatic. In fact, it was so casual, so mundane in its delivery, that I almost missed the full weight of what was being said, until hours later, when I was lying awake staring at the cracks in my ceiling, trying to understand how the people who raised me could say something so cold and not even realize it. I had brought the envelope to the dinner table, not with showy pride or childish giddiness, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had waited her turn, who had spent years letting others take center stage, and now, finally, had something worth standing up for. I slid it across the table toward my father, waited as he wiped barbecue sauce from his fingers, and opened it with the same expression he used to read grocery receipts. And I remember the exact pause, no more than 3 seconds, before he passed it to my mother without a word. She scanned it quickly, eyes flicking back and forth like she was checking for a hidden catch, then said, "That's nice, honey, but you know things are a little tight right now, and your brother really needs us to be around for his meetings and his court stuff. We just don't have the room to be flying out to visit or helping with moving expenses, you understand, right?" And then came the line, tossed like a final stone into an already sinking boat. "You've always been the independent one. You'll figure it out. He needs us more." They moved on after that, back to their plates, back to the television humming in the background, as if the entire course of my life hadn't just been rerouted by that dismissive wave of the hand, that quiet erasure of years of work, effort, and patience. And I sat there nodding the way I always did, swallowing disappointment the way some kids swallow cough syrup. Because you're told it's what's good for you, even though it tastes like poison and sticks in your throat long after it's gone. But here's the part no one ever talks about. When you grow up as the stable one, the reliable daughter, the easy child who doesn't ask for much, people stop checking on you. They assume your silence is strength, that your lack of drama means you're thriving, when really, you're just disappearing piece by piece, turning invisible in the very home where you should be most seen. I was the one who made honor roll every year without a word, the one who got up at 5 to take the bus to work, the one who kept her head down and never got caught sneaking out because she never snuck out to begin with. And for all of that, every straight-A report card, every part-time paycheck I brought home to help with bills, I got the consolation prize of being told I didn't need support because I wasn't falling apart loudly enough to be noticed. That week after the dinner, I tried to pretend like I was okay. I kept going through the motions, attending my community college classes, working extra shifts at the diner where my feet always ached by the end of the night, and smiling when customers called me sweetheart, like I hadn't just watched my own future get benched in favor of someone who hadn't earned it. My brother, meanwhile, was on his 3rd failed rehab stint, still blaming everyone else for his screw-ups, still charming my parents into believing he just needed one more chance to turn things around. And maybe he did. Maybe he really was struggling with demons I couldn't see. But what burned the most wasn't that he got their help. It was that my success was treated like a luxury they couldn't afford, not an investment worth making. I remember going into my room that night, locking the door, and pulling out the folder I had kept hidden in my desk drawer. Inside were acceptance letters from 3 schools, 1 local, 2 out of state, and the scholarship documents for the university I ultimately chose. I read the words over and over, running my fingers along the embossed school crest like it might suddenly disappear if I didn't hold it tightly enough. It was all real, my ticket out, my chance. And they didn't even look at it, so I made a choice. I didn't beg. I didn't try to prove my worth with tears or explanations. I didn't ask them to reconsider. Because somewhere deep down, I knew that if I had to plead for their belief, I'd never stop pleading. I had to let go of the fantasy that they'd wake up one day and see me, really see me, not as the fallback, not as the shadow of my brother's chaos, but as someone who deserved more simply because I had earned it. And so I started planning, quietly, strategically. I opened a new bank account. I told the university I'd accept the scholarship. I asked about early move-in. I lined up my class schedule. Every time they asked what I was doing that week, I just smiled and said, same as usual. Because if they weren't going to see me while I was standing in front of them, I sure as hell wasn't going to announce when I vanished. It's a strange thing, plotting your own disappearance while the people around you don't even notice. Stranger still is how liberating it feels, like stretching after being cramped in a too small space for too long, like breathing real air after years of holding your breath. They told me he needed them more. Maybe he did. But what they didn't know, what they still don't understand, is that I needed someone too. And when no one showed up, I stopped waiting. I built the lifeboat myself, and I was ready to sail far enough that they'd never catch up. The silence became my blueprint, and in that void where concern should have been, where simple curiosity or the smallest gesture of, "How are you holding up out there?" might have softened me, I poured every drop of disappointment, rage, and neglected potential into building up a version of myself that owed nothing to the people who couldn't be bothered to notice when I left. College, for me, was not just about lectures, exams, and credits. It was an unmarked battlefield where every grade, every paper, every late-night study session, with eyes barely open and fingers cramping around a pen, was a punch thrown in a private war no one else knew I was fighting. My dorm room was tiny, bare walls, linoleum floors that echoed with every step, and furniture that looked like it had been stolen from a prison. But it was mine. For the first time in my life, no one barged in. No one needed me to clean up their mess, to explain away a lie, to smooth things over when someone lost their temper. I could breathe. I could think. I could finally just be a person with thoughts and dreams that mattered, even if only to myself. And so I threw myself into it, into everything: early morning classes, late night lab work, clubs, volunteer hours, tutoring sessions, anything that kept me moving forward. Because if I slowed down, if I gave myself a second to sit with the silence, I might start wondering why they still hadn't called. The truth is, for the first few months, I kept hoping. I told myself that maybe they didn't have my new number, maybe the mail got lost, maybe they were giving me space, even though that would have been a first. I checked my phone more than I'd like to admit. Every ring that wasn't them, every day that passed without a single word, hardened something inside me. It wasn't just that they didn't reach out. It was the realization that they weren't even curious. They had no questions about where I'd gone, what I was doing, how I was surviving. I could have been dead on the side of the road, and I honestly don't think they would have noticed unless someone mailed them the bill. So I did what I had always done best. I adapted. I figured out how to live on next to nothing, how to apply for every grant, every scholarship, every single dollar of aid that might keep me afloat. I learned how to fix the leaking pipe under my bathroom sink with duct tape and a YouTube tutorial. I figured out which cafeteria days had the best leftovers and how to stash them for later. I started tutoring rich kids in calculus for $20 an hour and used the cash to buy secondhand textbooks, with someone else's notes already scribbled in the margins. I didn't have time to feel sorry for myself. Pity doesn't pay rent. And slowly, without fanfare or applause, I started to rise. By the end of my first year, I was on the dean's list. By the end of the second, I had two professors writing me letters of recommendation for research fellowships I hadn't even known existed. My third year, I got invited to present at a national academic conference and stood in front of a room full of people whose names were printed on textbooks, delivering a presentation I'd written in a public library because my laptop had died the night before. No one in that room knew I'd eaten a granola bar for dinner or that I'd slept in my car the week before finals because my dorm flooded and I couldn't afford a motel. But I stood tall, I delivered, and they clapped like I had walked in from Harvard with a trust fund and a family who cheered me on. From the second I could talk, that's when the idea started to form. It wasn't about revenge at first, not in the dramatic movie villain way people think of it, but more like a slow-burning desire to be seen. Not heard, not acknowledged with a polite nod, but really seen. So visibly successful that even people who tried to forget me would have to squint through the brightness. I didn't want their help anymore. I didn't want their apologies. I just wanted them to know they had missed it. That while they were too busy rearranging my brother's wreckage, I had built a palace from the rubble they left me in. That fall, during my final year, I applied for every honor, every scholarship extension, every award that could possibly put my name on a program, a banner, a certificate. Not because I needed the recognition, but because I wanted it documented. I wanted proof, not just for myself, but for the record, so that if they ever tried to tell the story differently, to rewrite history with their name tucked neatly in the footnotes of my success, there would be pages and plaques and people to say otherwise. There's something oddly powerful about being the ghost in your own story, the one who disappears from the family photo album and reappears 4 years later with degrees, achievements, and a smile they never helped shape. Every time I updated my resume, I imagined my mother reading it and not understanding a single line. Every time I nailed an interview or got an email that started with congratulations, I heard my father's voice saying college was a waste of time, and then imagined him choking on his own words. And still they didn't call. Not once. Not on birthdays, not during holidays. Not even when the news went around that I had won a national scholarship named after someone famous they would have recognized. I sent nothing to them. I offered no breadcrumbs to follow. If they wanted to find me, they'd have to look. And looking had never been their strong suit. So I waited. I waited and worked and rose, until one day, I found myself holding an invitation printed in gold, addressed to the top-performing graduates and their families. And that's when I knew. That's when the idea stopped being a fantasy and became a strategy. They hadn't asked about my life, so I decided I'd make it impossible to ignore, not through confrontation or guilt or forced reconciliation, but with a stage, a spotlight, and their daughter standing in the middle of it, wearing the honors robes they never thought she'd earn. It arrived on a gray Thursday morning, the kind of day where everything feels half-finished and a little off-kilter. The sky stretched out in dull sheets of cloud, the air thick with the taste of a storm that couldn't quite commit. When I opened the envelope that would change everything, not for me, because I already knew who I had become, but for them, for the people who had spent years looking through me like I was furniture in a house they no longer bothered to decorate. The letter was thick, the paper heavy and textured like money, with embossed lettering in a deep navy blue that spelled out my full name, middle initial and all, at the top of a formal invitation to the university's annual honors convocation, an event reserved only for the top 1% of students across all departments. A ceremony for scholars who had not just excelled, but triumphed against odds, who were chosen to represent the heart and mind of the graduating class. I held it in my hands longer than I needed to, not because I didn't know what it was, but because of what it meant and what it could do. This was no ordinary graduation invite. This was a stage, a moment, a weapon if I chose to wield it right. And for the first time in 4 years, I decided to give my family something they didn't ask for, didn't expect, and definitely didn't deserve. I decided to invite them to the one moment in my life they had never bothered to imagine, because they never believed I'd get there to begin with. I remember sitting at my desk, the soft hum of the campus library, faint through the walls, drafting the envelope with care, choosing my words, not with bitterness, but with brutal clarity. I didn't write a heartfelt letter. I didn't soften the blow or lace it with pleasantries. I simply included the invitation, circled my name in red pen, and beneath it scribbled 2 lines in small, tight handwriting. Cassie Monroe, valedictorian, honors graduate, speaking at 3 p.m. I didn't say love, Cassie. I didn't say hope you can make it. I just signed the damn thing like it was a contract. Because in some ways, it was. I addressed 3 envelopes, one to my mother, one to my father, and one to my brother, who last I heard was couch surfing between friends and had racked up another court date for some minor assault charge. I don't know why I included him. Maybe to let him see what it looked like when someone took rock bottom and built a ladder instead of digging deeper. Maybe just to prove that I'd done something he never would. Whatever the reason, I sent the invites without a return address and went on with my week like nothing had happened, like I hadn't just dropped a slow-burning bomb into the center of the house I had once called home. The ceremony was set for a Saturday afternoon, held in the grand theater that sat at the heart of campus. All marble floors and stained glass windows, and columns that tried to look ancient but were really just ambitious concrete. I arrived early, dressed in the deep navy gown that brushed against my ankles, and the gold honors cords that sat heavy across my shoulders like a crown no one could take from me. My hair was pinned back, my speech folded in my palm, my heart steady, not from nerves, but from years of training myself not to expect warmth from people who'd left me out in the cold. I didn't scan the crowd at first. I didn't give them that satisfaction. I stood backstage with the other speakers, listening as the dean rehearsed names and prepared the microphone. And I waited for the moment when I would step out, not as someone's daughter or someone's sister or the girl who had always been so mature for her age, but as a woman who had rewritten the narrative they once handed her like a hand-me-down coat that didn't fit. When my name was called, the applause was thunderous, but my eyes were laser-focused on 3 faces I hadn't seen in 4 years, sitting stiffly in the middle rows, clutching programs with confusion written across their expressions like graffiti. My mother looked like she had swallowed something bitter. My father wore the same stoic face he'd always used when uncomfortable. And my brother, my golden brother, the center of their universe, was slouched and squinting, trying to reconcile the image on stage with the person he used to ignore in the hallway. And that was the moment I let it all wash over me, not just the pride, not just the justice, but the cold, surgical satisfaction of being undeniable. They could pretend they didn't remember why I left, pretend they hadn't noticed my silence for years, but now they had to sit there and clap while an auditorium full of strangers cheered for a version of me they had never taken the time to meet. There's a power in silence, but there's an even deeper power in orchestrated revelation, in choosing not to beg, not to explain, not to demand, but to show up in your full glory, fully formed, and let your very existence be the indictment. I didn't need to say anything. The speech would come later. For now, just standing there, my name echoing through the hall, their jaws slowly dropping, was enough. It was the first time I'd ever seen them speechless, and I drank in the sight like it was water after a desert. They didn't know the long nights. They didn't know the meals I skipped, the jobs I juggled, the times I nearly dropped out because the weight was too much. They didn't know the scholarships I chased like lifelines, the mentors who became stand-in parents, the strangers who showed me more kindness than my own blood. They didn't know any of it, because they never asked. And now, all they could do was sit and watch, eyes wide, mouths shut, program in hand, printed in bold across the top. Honor ceremony featuring keynote speaker Cassie Monroe. There's a strange moment right before you speak in front of a crowd, especially one this large and this expectant, where time seems to twist in on itself, where every second stretches impossibly long and yet feels like it's slipping through your fingers all at once. And as I stood there behind the podium, fingertips grazing the edges of my speech, I realized that for all the hours I'd spent rehearsing these words, for all the scenarios I'd imagined in my head, me poised and composed, them confused and silent, Nothing had quite prepared me for the reality of locking eyes with the very people who had once dismissed my future. Like it was a bad investment, and now sat stiff and speechless in the middle of a theater that roared my name like it meant something. I took a breath, deep and deliberate, not because I was nervous, those days were long behind me, but because I wanted to absorb everything, to memorize every blink of confusion, every nervous glance they exchanged, every awkward shift in their seats as the auditorium lights framed me like a statue built out of 4 years of silence and sleepless nights. And when I finally looked down at the pages in my hands, I realized I didn't want to read the speech I had written. That version had been too clean, too polished, too rehearsed for what this moment had become. I didn't want perfection. I wanted truth. So I looked up, cleared my throat, and let it come out the way it was always meant to. I started not with statistics or gratitude or tired academic cliches, but with a memory, one I hadn't planned to share, one that bubbled up from the deepest part of me, raw and jagged and still pulsing. I told them about the day I packed a suitcase while my parents sat in the next room, arguing about who would take my brother to his court hearing. I told them how no one noticed when I left, how I walked away without a single question asked, how silence became both my punishment and my permission. I told them how I had built my entire college career not on the foundation of family pride or financial support or comforting phone calls during hard weeks, but on the stubborn belief that I could matter even if no one ever said I did. The room quieted, not politely, not in the way audiences usually do when someone with a degree begins to talk, but deeply, fully, in that breathless way that tells you they're listening not just to your words, but to the undercurrent of something they can't quite name but feel down in the bone, the sound of a life carved from the absence of applause. I didn't mention names. I didn't accuse or expose. That would have been too easy, too petty. Instead, I spoke about being invisible, about the heavy expectations placed on the ones who don't cause trouble, the ones who are told to wait their turn, to be grateful they're not the problem, to keep things together while someone else gets all the attention under the guise of need. I saw heads nod. I saw tears blinked away. I saw the kind of recognition that doesn't come from pity, but from memory, because half that room had probably been overlooked at some point too, written off by someone who should have known better. And then, near the end, I turned my gaze toward the center of the crowd and paused, just long enough to let the silence thicken, and I said, "Sometimes the people you love the most will fail to love you back in the way you need. Sometimes they will forget to ask where you went, and sometimes they'll only see you once you've stepped into the light they refuse to turn on. But that doesn't mean you stop walking. It means you build your own damn spotlight." That line hung in the air like smoke, and for a moment I stood there, steady and still, not smiling, not crying, just existing as fully and unapologetically as I had ever been allowed to. The applause started soft and then grew, rising and rising until the whole room felt like it was shaking with it. A wave of sound that crashed over me in a way I had never experienced before, because it wasn't coming from duty or obligation or bloodlines. It was real, earned, mine. After the ceremony, while the other graduates laughed and posed for pictures with flowers and balloons, I stood near the back, letting the gold cords rest warm against my collarbone, watching as my family lingered awkwardly near the exit like people unsure of whether they were invited to the party or crashing it. My mother looked like she wanted to speak but didn't know how to start, while my father's expression shifted between pride and something that looked a lot like shame. And my brother, well, he didn't say a word. He looked like he had finally seen a version of me that he hadn't believed existed, and maybe that was enough punishment for him. They waited for me to approach, to offer some olive branch or extend some gesture of peace. But I didn't move. I didn't wave. I didn't even nod. I let them stand there, holding their programs like they might hold a regret, something too late to change, too heavy to forget. And then, with the same quiet resolve I'd left home with 4 years earlier, I turned and walked away, not in anger, not in arrogance, but in full ownership of the distance I had created and the strength it had taken to keep it. And that's where I leave the story. Not with a hug or a tearful reunion or some grand reckoning that makes everything all right again, but in the space between what they expected and what actually happened. I don't know if they stayed for the reception. I don't know if they talked about me on the way home, or if the silence in the car was louder than anything I ever said on that stage. I just know they saw me, finally. And sometimes that's the only revenge worth having, because I didn't need to tell them they were wrong. I didn't need to make them apologize. I just needed them to see what they missed, and to know, deep down, that the person they had once overlooked had grown so far beyond them, she didn't even have to say a word.